In 1964, Richard Feynman stood in front of his students and said something that no physicist had said before. I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics. Not nobody has solved it yet. Not it is very complicated. Nobody understands it. Feynman had spent 20 years building quantum electrodynamics. He had won the Nobel Prize for it. He understood mathematics more deeply than almost anyone alive. And he said, nobody understands it. The Mundaka Upanishad, composed 2,500 years before Feynman's lecture, had already explained precisely why this was true. Feynman was not lamenting a failure. He was not saying physics was broken. He was identifying something far more precise, an epistemological ceiling. There are two kinds of knowing. The first, knowing the name of something, knowing the equations, knowing the terminology, knowing how to calculate the correct answer. The second, knowing the thing itself, understanding, not just describing what is actually happening. Feynman knew quantum mechanics completely in the first sense. He could not know it in the second sense. Nobody could. He wrote in another place, "You can know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing whatever about the bird. I learned very early the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something." Two kinds of knowing, the name and the thing itself. The Mundaka Upanishad called this Apara Vidya and Apara Vidya, and it described the precise relationship between them. Before Greece had philosophers, before Rome had citizens, before the word physics existed. This video maps Feynman's epistemological discovery against the Mundaka Upanishad's framework precisely. Not as a coincidence, not as a metaphor. As two independent investigations of the same epistemological territory, one arrived at through 300 years of quantum physics, one arrived at through direct investigation of the nature of knowing itself, arriving at the same distinction. And then asks the question both frameworks point toward. If conceptual knowledge cannot fully know reality, what kind of knowing can? Quantum mechanics is the most precisely verified theory in the history of science. Its predictions match experimental results to more than 10 decimal places. No theory in any field has ever achieved this precision. And yet every physicist who follows the mathematics all the way to its logical conclusion encounters the same wall. The measurement problem. Why does the wave function collapse when observed? The interpretation problem. What is actually happening between measurements? The observer problem. What constitutes an observer? These are not gaps waiting to be filled by more sophisticated mathematics. They are structural limits of the conceptual framework itself. The equations describe what nature does. They cannot describe what nature is. Feynman again from his lectures. Do not keep saying to yourself, if you can possibly avoid it, but how can it be like that? Because you will get down the drain into a blind alley from which nobody has yet escaped. Nobody knows how it can be like that. A blind alley from which nobody has yet escaped. That is the ceiling of conceptual knowing. Feynman was not alone in recognizing this limit. Erwin Schrödinger, who developed the wave equation, whose equation Feynman spent his career extending, read the Upanishads in German translation in the 1920s. He wrote in Mind and Matter in 1958, "The unity and continuity of Vedanta are reflected in the unity and continuity of wave mechanics. In quantum mechanics, it is the wave function. In Vedanta, it is Brahman." Schrödinger recognized what Feynman later confirmed in different words. The mathematics of quantum mechanics describes the same territory. The Vedic tradition had approached from a completely different direction. two physicists, two different eras, the same recognition. The Vedic tradition had a precise name for what both were pointing at. Here is the question at the exact intersection of quantum mechanics and Vedic philosophy. If conceptual knowledge, however precise, however mathematical, cannot fully know reality, what kind of knowing can? Feynman did not answer this question. He identified it as the limit of physics. The Mundaka Upanishad was written specifically to answer it. The question Sanaka asks his teacher Angiras at the opening of the text is one of the most important questions ever asked. What is that by knowing which all is known? Not what facts should we accumulate, not what theories should we build. What kind of knowing produces complete knowing? Angiras answered with a distinction that Feynman, 2,500 years later, would arrive at independently through physics. Mundaka Upanishad 1.1.4. The illumined sages say knowledge is twofold, higher and lower. Apara Vidya, the lower knowledge, is everything Feynman mastered. The Upanishad defines it precisely: the study of the Vedas, linguistics, grammar, astronomy, rituals, all the arts. In modern terms, every science, every discipline, every technology, every mathematical system ever developed. Apara Vidya is not inferior knowledge. It is extraordinarily useful knowledge. But the Upanishad makes one claim about it, that Feynman confirmed with a Nobel Prize's worth of physics. Apara Vidya is always partial. It is always subject to revision. It describes phenomena, it does not know the knower. The teacher Acharyaji summarized it. Apara Vidya has no end. It only ends with Paravidya. There is no accumulation of conceptual knowledge that reaches the thing Feynman said nobody could understand. That territory requires a different kind of knowing entirely. Paravidya is not more advanced conceptual knowledge. It is not a more sophisticated theory. It is not a better mathematical model. The Upanishad describes it as subtractive, not additive, where Apara Vidya accumulates. Para Vidya removes. What does it remove? The assumption that the knower is separate from what it is trying to know. The wave function collapse problem in quantum mechanics is precisely this. The observer and the observed cannot be cleanly separated. The act of measurement changes what is being measured. The knower is not standing outside reality. It is participating in reality. Paravidya is the direct recognition of this participation, not as a theory, not as a philosophical position. As direct knowing, the kind Feynman's equations could point toward, but never deliver. Let us place Feynman beside the Mundaka Upanishad directly. Feynman, knowing the name of something. Mundaka Upanishad, Apara Vidya, all knowledge acquired through concept, language, and measurement. The equations of quantum mechanics. The names of traditions. The terminology of science and philosophy. Both. This kind of knowing has a ceiling. Feynman, knowing something, direct understanding, beyond naming. Mundaka Upanishad, Paravidya, direct knowledge that does not accumulate but reveals. Both. This is what the lower knowledge is pointing toward. Feynman, nobody understands quantum mechanics, even the best physics hits the wall. Mundaka Upanishad, Apara Vidya has no end. It only ends with Paravidya. Both. Conceptual knowledge cannot know the knower. 3 rows, every cell matched, 2,500 years apart. The Mundaka Upanishad does not stop at the diagnosis. It does not say, here is the ceiling, accept it. It says, the ceiling of conceptual knowledge is precisely where direct knowing begins. And then in its second and third Mundakas, it provides the method, not a method for accumulating more Apara Vidya, a method for directly knowing what the equations describe from outside. The method Feynman could not offer, not because he was not brilliant enough, because physics, by its own definition, operates entirely within Apara Vidya. The territory Feynman identified as the limit of physics is the territory the Upanishads described as the beginning of Para Vidya. The Mundaka Upanishad is not alone in this description. Lao Tzu, writing the Tao Te Ching in approximately 400 BCE, in the very first line of the very first chapter, "The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The Tao that can be named, the Tao that becomes an object of conceptual knowledge, is already not the thing itself." This is Feynman's distinction in 8 words. The named Tao is Apara Vidya, the conceptual map of reality. The eternal Tao, the Tao that resists naming, is Para Vidya, the direct knowing that does not come through accumulation, but through the falling away of the assumption that the knower is separate from what it is trying to name. 3 frameworks, 3 civilizations. Feynman in Cambridge, Massachusetts, 1964. Nobody understands quantum mechanics. Angiras, in the forests of ancient India, to 700 BCE. Apara Vidya has no end, it only ends with Para Vidya. Lao Tzu, in ancient China, to 400 BCE. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. 3 descriptions of the same epistemological ceiling, 3 pointers toward the same territory beyond it. Feynman developed what became known as the Feynman technique, a method for testing whether you actually know something or only know its name. The technique, try to explain the concept in simple language, without using its technical name. If you cannot, you only know the label. You do not know the thing. This technique operates entirely within Apara Vidya. It is a method for distinguishing good Apara Vidya from poor Apara Vidya. But Feynman knew and said clearly that even perfect Apara Vidya does not produce understanding of quantum mechanics. The Upanishad would say, of course, because the understanding Feynman was seeking is not the next level of Apara Vidya. It is the recognition that the one asking the question is the same field the question is being asked about. The observer is not separate from the quantum field. The knower is not separate from Brahman. The one trying to understand the Tao is the Tao. Para Vidya is not a technique. It is not a better practice of the Feynman technique. It is a direct recognition. The Mundaka Upanishad describes it as the knowledge by which everything is known, not by which facts about everything are accumulated, but by which the knowing nature of awareness itself is directly recognized. When Feynman says nobody understands quantum mechanics, the Upanishad says, correct. Nobody understands it from the outside, because the one who could understand it from the inside is what the field is made of. The awareness reading these words right now is not a brain inside a skull looking at a universe from a distance. It is the field, temporarily expressed as a pattern of attention, encountering a description of itself. That recognition, the Upanishad says, is Para Vidya, not something you accumulate, something you stop obscuring. Feynman said quantum mechanics leads into a blind alley from which nobody has yet escaped. The Upanishad says the alley only appears blind from within Apara Vidya. From within the assumption that the knower is separate, that the physicist is outside the field being measured, there is no exit. The measurement problem cannot be solved from within the framework that creates it. Para Vidya is not an escape from the alley. It is the recognition that you were never inside it. The observer was never separate from the field. The knower was never outside Brahman. The physicist was never outside the quantum vacuum. The Tao that cannot be named was never separate from the one trying to name it. Here is a brief practice, a version of the Feynman technique, applied to the knower rather than to knowledge. Feynman's technique. Without using the name of the thing, describe what you actually know about it. The Upanishads technique. Without using any concept, notice what is actually knowing right now. Not what you know. What is knowing? Close your eyes if possible. Notice that there is awareness present right now. Now try to name it. Notice that the name is not the thing. The word awareness is Apara Vidya, a label for something that existed before the label. Now, without using any name or concept, simply notice the awareness itself. Not what it is aware of, the awareness itself. This is what Feynman could not reach through equations. Not because it is remote, but because it is the one doing the reaching. The Mundaka Upanishad calls this Apara Vidya, not knowledge of something, the recognition of the knower as the known. Rest there. Gently return. In 1964, Richard Feynman told his students at MIT that nobody understands quantum mechanics. He was right. Nobody understands it through Apara Vidya, through the accumulation of names, equations, and conceptual models. The Mundaka Upanishad had already said so, 2,500 years before Feynman's lecture. And then, unlike physics, it described what comes after the ceiling. Not more knowledge, direct knowing. The territory physics maps from the outside. The territory awareness is on the inside of. Feynman pointed at the wall. The Upanishads described what is on the other side. Lao Tzu named it in 8 words. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. 3 civilizations, 2.5 millennia, the same epistemological territory. The next video goes further into this territory, following the physicist who came closest to crossing from Apara Vidya into Para Vidya. Ancient wisdom, quantum proof, direct knowing. This is quantum nosis.